The gunfire tore through the night like thunder. At first I thought it was hunters too close to the property line, maybe some teenagers showing off with rifles, but when I stepped out onto the porch, what I saw made my blood freeze. Spotlights cut across the ranch as two Black Hawk helicopters hovered low, their rotors whipping the dust into storms. And on the ridge above my barn, men in mismatched uniforms with HOA enforcement, stitched on their sleeves, were firing into the air with AR-15s. And at their center, directing them with a flashlight like some deranged general, was Karen. Karen wasn't just a nuisance neighbor or a petty rule pusher, she was a tyrant who believed the HOA was her kingdom and the people under it her subjects. I had seen her throw tantrums over mailboxes, scream at veterans for flying flags, even fine widows for keeping gardens too rustic. But tonight, she had escalated from harassment to outright war. And the worst part? The helicopters weren't just any choppers. They were part of a federal rescue operation, delivering emergency medical supplies after the floods had washed out half the county roads. She wasn't shooting at trespassers. She was attacking a federal mission. I shouted up at her, my voice raw against the roar of blades. "Karen, call them off. Those are rescue birds." But she just turned, her face flushed and twisted with arrogance, and screamed back, "This is HOA airspace. They didn't ask for permission. Shoot them down if you have to." My fists clenched so tight I thought my bones would crack. My daughter stood behind me, clutching my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Dad, they're going to kill someone," she whispered. And that's when I knew I couldn't wait for law enforcement to catch up. I had to act. I ran to the barn, throwing open the heavy doors to reveal the generator and the radio rig I kept for emergencies. It wasn't a hobbyist's toy. Years ago, through my work contracting with the National Guard, I had been authorized to host a repeater station on my property. My ranch was a hub for federal communications in disaster zones. And now, as Karen played soldier on the ridge, she had no idea she was firing into a protected federal airspace where every word and bullet was being logged in real time. I keyed the mic, my voice steady despite the rage in my veins. "Command, this is Falcon Post. Unauthorized armed civilians firing on your aircraft. Repeat, hostile fire from ridge line above my coordinates." Static crackled. Then the reply came, clipped and firm. "Copy, Falcon Post. Units inbound. Hold position. Do not engage." But fate had other plans. One of the fake HOA cops, a young man barely out of his teens, panicked as the helicopter banked low. He dropped his rifle and stumbled back, shouting at Karen. "This isn't right. They're not trespassing." Theory helping. Karen spun on him, her bulk heaving, and slapped him so hard he fell into the dirt. "Coward," she screeched. "You do what I say or you're out of this neighborhood forever." The boy's voice cracked as he shouted back, "This isn't your neighborhood. It never was." The crowd of neighbors watching from the road gasped. For the first time, Karen's own soldiers were turning on her. And then came the twist. Out of the shadows on the far side of the ridge, floodlights snapped on, blinding the fake cops. Engines roared as a convoy of unmarked SUVs surged up the hill, doors flying open to reveal men and women in tactical gear. Federal marshals. They had been monitoring my channel and moved faster than even I expected. Their voices boomed through megaphones. "Drop your weapons. You are firing on federal aircraft. Put your hands on your heads." The ridge exploded into chaos. Half the fake HOA guards dropped their rifles immediately, hands trembling in the beams of the spotlights. The other half tried to scatter, sliding down the rocks or bolting toward their trucks. But the marshals were faster. Within minutes, zip ties bound their wrists, rifles were kicked into the dirt, and the air reeked of gun oil and fear. Karen, however, wasn't ready to surrender. She screamed at the marshals, her voice breaking with desperation. "You have no authority here. This is HOA jurisdiction. You can't arrest me." The lead marshal strode forward, his night vision goggles hanging from his helmet, his sidearm gleaming under the floodlights. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "you just ordered armed fire on federal rescue helicopters. You're going away for a very long time." Karen's face twisted, the false crown of power finally crumbling. She tried to lunge at the boy who had defied her earlier, blaming him for betrayal. But two marshals caught her arms, dragging her back as she kicked and wailed. Neighbors on the road erupted into cheers, some even clapping, others crying from relief. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't the one in control. She was the criminal, cuffed and exposed under the same stars she once claimed to rule. But the true reckoning came days later in court. The community packed the benches, eyes fixed on the woman who had terrorized them for years. The prosecutor laid out the charges: impersonating law enforcement, unlawful discharge of firearms, reckless endangerment, obstruction of a federal mission, conspiracy. Each word landed heavier than the last. The young man Karen had slapped testified with tears in his eyes, describing how she manipulated him and others with threats of fines and eviction. The pilots of the Blackhawks testified too, their voices flat as they described bullets ripping through the night sky inches from their rotors. And then, the unexpected twist that silenced the courtroom. A federal agent revealed emails intercepted from Karen's HOA server. Not only had she planned the attack, but she had been negotiating with a private developer to sell off parts of our land she didn't even own once she forced us out. The firing on helicopters wasn't madness. It was strategy, intimidation meant to scare us off while she cashed in. The judge's gavel slammed down. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was harsher than anyone predicted. 25 years in federal prison without parole. Karen's scream echoed as deputies dragged her away. But this time, no one flinched. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. The fake HOA disbanded, stripped of all authority. Federal oversight ensured no future association could form without transparency. Neighbors who once lived in fear began rebuilding fences, planting gardens, flying flags freely. And on my ranch, the federal rescue team came back not with weapons this time, but with supplies and gratitude. They set up a plaque at the edge of my barn. To Falcon Post, for standing firm against tyranny. One evening, my daughter asked, "Dad, will she ever come back?" I shook my head, pulling her close. She had her chance. She chose fire and lies. We chose truth. That's the difference. And in the quiet of that night, with the stars glittering above and the land finally safe, I realized Karen's downfall wasn't just justice, it was proof. Proof that no false badge, no fake army, no bully drunk on power can stand against the weight of truth and community. The verdict may have closed the case in the eyes of the court, but for our neighborhood, the story had only begun to unfold. When Karen was sentenced and hauled away screaming, the community walked out of the courthouse in a kind of stunned relief, like survivors stumbling into the sunlight after years underground. For the first time, we felt the grip of fear loosen from our lives. And yet, standing there, I knew this wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about reclaiming everything she had stolen: our trust, our freedom, and the sense of safety she had set on fire the moment she ordered rifles pointed skyward. Within days, federal investigators swept through the HOA offices, seizing files, computers, and even Karen's private storage unit. What they found was staggering. Not just fake uniforms and fraudulent enforcement badges, but blueprints of the neighborhood redrawn with property lines erased, as if Karen had already carved us up for sale. There were contracts drafted with developers, promises of luxury homes built over ranches, and even notes on which families she intended to drive out first. Seeing my family's name on that list sent a chill down my spine. She hadn't just hated Mesh had planned to erase me, but fate had flipped her plan on its head. Instead of being bulldozed into silence, we became stronger. The state appointed an interim trustee to dissolve what remained of the HOA, and a town hall was held in the community center. For the first time, neighbors who had once whispered in hallways or glanced nervously at her SUV parked outside spoke loudly and freely. People stood up to tell their stories. The widow who'd been fined for planting sunflowers, the father ticketed for letting his son's bike rest on the lawn, the veteran ordered to remove his flagpole. Each story was another nail in the coffin of Karen's so-called legacy. And by the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. The HOA was finished, permanently dissolved, never to return. That night, as the vote tally was read, the room erupted in cheers, people hugging, crying, even laughing in disbelief. For years, Karen had claimed she was the only thing keeping the community together. But now, without her, we were stronger than we'd ever been. My daughter, sitting beside me, leaned over and whispered, "Dad, it feels like we can finally breathe." I pulled her close, and for the first time in months, I believed her. Yet Karen herself lingered like a shadow. From prison, she tried to claw back her voice. Letters scrawled in manic handwriting began circulating, some mailed directly to neighbors, others leaked to the press. She accused us of conspiracy, of treason against her sovereign HOA, of colluding with federal agents to strip her of rightful power. But the world had moved on without her. Her words no longer struck fear, they drew ridicule. Late-night hosts mocked her letters, reporters dissected her delusions, and even her former allies pretended they had never known her. The queen of our cul-de-sac was reduced to a punchline. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that night, the gunfire, the helicopters swaying in the air, my daughter's terrified whisper in the dark. Healing takes time, so I poured myself into the land. My ranch became more than just home. It became a symbol. Federal agents returned, not with guns, but with hands ready to help. They installed a small communications hub in my barn, officially designating it Falcon Post in their records. They said my call had prevented a tragedy, and they wanted the place to stand as a permanent outpost for emergencies. A plaque was mounted at the entrance, gleaming in the sun, in honor of those who stood against false authority and protected life above all else. It wasn't just a plaque, it was a promise. The neighborhood rallied around it. Every Saturday, people brought their kids to see the plaque, to hear the story, to learn what happens when courage confronts arrogance. My son began teaching classes on emergency readiness. My daughter painted murals of helicopters soaring across blue skies, and my wife organized community dinners in the barn where fear had once lived. Laughter replaced whispers. Music replaced gunfire. And for the first time in years, the night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels safe. But the twist came one spring afternoon, nearly a year after Karen's arrest. I was fixing a fence post when a young man approached, his hands trembling. It was the boy Karen had slapped on the ridge, the one who had dropped his rifle and shouted the truth. He looked thinner, older, guilt etched into his face. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was stupid. I thought she had power. She scared me into it." I put down my hammer and shook his hand. "You found your voice when it mattered most. You told the truth. That's more than most people ever do." His eyes watered as he nodded, and in that moment, I knew the cycle had broken. Karen hadn't just lost her power, her followers had too. The memorial of her downfall wasn't a statue or a headline. It was that handshake. It was neighbors rebuilding fences together. It was children running free without the weight of false rules. It was the knowledge that fear only rules when people let it. Karen's 25-year sentence will run its course, but for us, her reign ended the night the marshals pulled her screaming into the dark. Everything since has been a new beginning. And yet, as I sit on the porch watching the sun dip behind the ridge where she once stood screaming at helicopters, I find myself wondering, was 25 years enough? For firing on rescue aircraft, for endangering lives, for stealing peace from so many families, was her punishment fitting? Or was it far too light? I'll leave that question with you. Was justice served? Or should her downfall have cut even deeper? Share what you think, because the answer doesn't just measure Karen's fate, it defines what we believe true justice ought to be.